and I've been posting these videos as a form of therapy in the recovery from watching my little brother be Paul Kieran's 64 with Down syndrome be locked away by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government, David Eby as leader, Nikki Sharma as Attorney General, and Sheila Malcolmson as the cabinet minister responsible for Paul's care. Paul was locked away for 588 days in his group home, and then I believe that he was killed by the guardian appointed by the government for my brother, my then 84-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, who had only met Paul on a few occasions over the course of his life, and who did not understand his speech or communication. So in these videos, I'm going to address first what I saw, Paul's being confined, isolated, and then killed, and then my response to the changes in law in Canada that have allowed euthanasia of 103,000 to date, innocent, vulnerable, almost 100% white Canadian-born citizens as medical care. So Paul was locked away. Paul and I grew up together. I'm only 2 years older than him. And my two other sisters and my mother cared for him here in Greater Vancouver. We all moved here. And we cared for him on weekends and holidays. So he was used to having, he was raised at home. I grew up with him. I taught him to print the only word that he could ever print or read, his first name, Paul. It took me about a year as a little girl to teach him. That's how I know the document the government created for Paul is a fraud and a forgery. When Paul got lost, if he would wander off as a little boy, the Sudbury police would ask me to find him, and I always could find him. And I ended up becoming a psychologist for adults with mentally handicapped for the government. And then when I could see that they needed legal representation, I was the first single mother to graduate from law school in British Columbia history. And then I was hired by Carrie Lynn Finlay, the current leader of the opposition party in British Columbia, as a family lawyer. Well, I was a federal prosecutor for several years. Then I worked for Carrie Lynn Finlay, and then I had my own law practice until I became disabled in an accident in 2008. After that, I only worked part-time as a lawyer, and then I retired completely as a lawyer in 2016. So first I'm going to talk about my experience of watching my little brother be locked away and then killed by the government. And then I'm going to talk about this euthanasia in Canada in general and what I've learned about it as a former federal prosecutor, psychologist and federal prosecutor. So, as I said, I discovered in April of 2022 that the government had created a secret and what I alleged to be a fraudulent forged power of attorney appointing my elderly 84-year-old Catholic nun sister in Ontario as Paul's guardian so they could give him the COVID-19 shot. And I discovered that this was a pattern, that they did this with all mentally handicapped adults in their care, is they had them sign these documents called representation agreements, and they would appoint, the government would pick out who was going to be, and secretly the government would appoint a guardian. And what happened was, as soon as I complained to the Burnaby RCMP, when I got this document produced to me, immediately after I complained to the Burnaby RCMP that it was a fraud and a forgery, the constable that I spoke with said she would get the original of the document. She would get a search warrant for the original. She did not do that. What she ended up doing was she went to the group home and tipped them off that I had complained, and I got a letter from the nun's lawyer in Ottawa saying my visits with Paul, I had a written agreement with the government that I could visit Paul twice a week, once at his group home and once at my home. I took him to Newfoundland twice. I took him to the P&E every year. I took him to movies, parks, We went on outings almost every weekend, and then I would cook homemade meals for him, like the meals that our mother used to make. But at the demand of the government, the nun terminated my visits with Paul, and I got a letter from the group home's lawyer saying that I would never see my brother again. I did everything legally that I could possibly think of. I complained to the Human Rights Tribunal. They slow walked my complaint until after Paul had died. I I tried to work my way through the courts to be appointed Paul's guardian, or even just to restore our visits, but I just wasn't successful. I wasn't even given leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. And I did all of this at my own expense, with my own effort. It was basically a full-time job, whereas my sister, the nun, had 2 law firms. The Catholic Church spent more than, I estimate, $2 million on her legal representation to uphold this fraudulent and forged power of attorney. She never moved Paul, my little brother, to be closer to her, and she never moved here to be closer to him. So he had no one nearby to represent him. It's the first time in history that a person outside of the province of British Columbia has been upheld as being the representative of an incapable person in British Columbia. My legal experience was a complete fiasco. I know how the legal system is supposed to work. All the documents that I had prepared for the court disappeared off the desk of the judge who heard this case, Mr. Justice Basran. And then, so I lost, and the nun's lawyer, Casey Deanshaw of the law firm, the huge Canadian law firm, Borden Ladner Gervais in Vancouver, promised the judge that I would be able to, if the nun was appointed Paul's guardian, that I could still visit him. But then he would never allow. Casey Deanshaw lied because he never allowed a single visit. I got a phone call from Casey Deanshaw on April 15th of 2024 saying that Paul had a stroke and I could arrange a visit through him. So they waited until Paul had a stroke when there was no chance of me getting an authentic sample of his signature before they would allow me to have an in-person visit. And even then, they only allowed a 10-minute visit per day at the hospital, Burnaby Hospital. When the nun could see that Paul was not going to die, she flew in from Ontario and put him in a room where only she and he were in the room. No one else was allowed in. And it had a door that closed. So the medical staff couldn't really see what was going on in the room. And while I was sitting outside in the hallway, I got a telephone call from the Burnaby RCMP, and they told me that they had been ordered by their Ottawa Oversight Agency to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent forged power of attorney. I was so thrilled. I thought, oh, this is a breakthrough. Finally, somebody's listening. I was so excited, and I went to court the next morning and asked the judge to suspend the nun's authority over Paul. I feared that she was going to kill him because she knew that she was being investigated by the Burnaby RCMP, and she thought that if Paul was dead, then there was nothing they could do. They couldn't investigate the fraudulent forged power of attorney. When I got back to the hospital from the courtroom, the nun met me at the door of Paul's room, and she said to me, she wouldn't look me in the eye. And if someone won't look you, one thing I've learned as being a lawyer for 23 years, if someone won't look you in the eye, they're lying or they're concealing something. And she said to me through gritted teeth, say goodbye to Paul, he's dying. Paul appeared to me, all of his medical supports, he had a ventilator with an oxygen mask, and all his medical supports had been stripped away, and he appeared to be dead. His eyes were wide open, his pupils were dilated and fixed, and he was completely still, and his hand was unresponsive, still, and cool to the touch. So I believe that she had ordered the treating doctor, Michael Baker, to remove all of Paul's medical supports and to kill him using the medical assistance in dying. So this is where the issue of medical assistance in dying comes in. Even in Canada, that has killed 103,000 of its citizens since 2015, has euthanized 103,000 of its citizens. At this moment, you're not allowed to euthanize people unless they are mentally capable of consenting to it. Now, Paul didn't want to die. Every time I visited him, he looked desperate. He tried to act really normal, and he tried to act like he could, he was getting better, because he knew the nun wanted to kill him. She'd flown in, and she hadn't flown in for nothing. She was going to kill him, and I felt so helpless. I just didn't know what to do. I mean, can you imagine? Think of the person you love most in the world and for whom you're responsible, and somebody wants to kill them and you have no control over it. So Paul tried to look normal, but, she wanted him dead. And he was dead after I went in and tried to get her authority suspended. I wrote to the Burnaby RCMP. I said, treat his death as suspicious, but I never heard from them again. I begged them to interview me. They never did. They could have cared less. They said that because Dr. Michael Baker had signed off on Paul's death certificate, there was nothing they could do. And then after Paul had died, if that wasn't, they had stripped Paul of every human right anybody could possibly have. He was isolated and confined with no visits for 588 days. But after he died, then they went after me in the Catholic Church, paid to have me have all of my rights as a citizen, the normal access to Canadian courts that anybody in the world has, stripped from me. So I have no access to Canadian courts. I have to apply to a judge to even file a response. And you could sue me and I couldn't reply without permission of a judge. And I applied for leave to appeal that to the Supreme Court of Canada. I wasn't even given permission to even appeal it. So that's where things stand now. So while all of this was going on, even before this happened, I started, although I wasn't practicing law any longer, I started to notice that, having been a prosecutor, I could see that the murder provisions of the Criminal Code of Canada had been changed to allow doctors to kill Canadian citizens by lethal injection, the same way that convicted murderers are killed by the American government. And as a matter of fact, since that time, Canada has executed extrajudicially, so with no legal oversight at all. You might think there is legal oversight, there's none. So after 811 years since the Magna Carta in England, just delimiting the government's role and powers over the individual, Canada has regressed into a kind of a, not even Neanderthals. Like, I can't even say Neanderthals. Prehistoric men didn't kill their elderly and ill citizens. There's evidence of sick and disabled Neanderthals having healed. As a matter of fact, there's evidence of saber-toothed tigers, the prehistoric animals, saber-toothed tigers being cared for by their community and having catastrophic injuries that had healed because they were cared for by their community. So every day not every day, but almost every day, I talk with ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, and we argue about, they hone my arguments on medical assistance in dying, and I can't remember which one, but if anyone says to you, well, and I hear this 5 times a day, oh, if I was sick and uncomfortable or in pain, I would want to die mercifully and with dignity. And here's your response to that. Number one, no one can give informed consent to being killed. Okay, first of all, because we don't know what death is. It's not a medical procedure. Medical is from the Greek verb to heal, and nobody's healed with a lethal injection. And so it's a form of religious preference So there's people who are atheists and believe that you just disappear. Your everything, your consciousness and your body disappears after you're killed. But there's people like me who are Catholic who believe that you go to heaven, or if you commit suicide, you go to hell and you burn forever. We believe in an afterlife. There's other religions like I believe in the Jewish religion. There's no afterlife. But Muslims do believe in an afterlife. We've all heard about the 72 virgins in the afterlife. If you're of the Buddhists, you believe in reincarnation, where you come back as another animal or a different person on different levels. But every religion has a different concept of an afterlife. But the bottom line is we do not know. But the government has defaulted to the atheist version of what an afterlife is. So a medical doctor, no one can give informed, number one, no one can give informed consent to being killed. And it's not doctors in their province to decide who should live and who should die. That's always been the citizens, the judges and juries that have decided that. We've developed a system in the Commonwealth cultures of the world. So number one, no one can give informed consent to being killed. So every doctor is engaging in an unlawful act when they deliberately administer a lethal injection. And it's not a pretty sight either. The person is paralyzed and you drown in your own fluids. That's how you die. And there's been attempts to try and find out if it's painless or not, but nobody has really investigated it at all. So number one, you cannot give informed consent to being killed. Number two, it's irreversible. So capital punishment, or the hanging or the killing of individuals by the state, was abolished by Parliament in Canada in 1976 for civilians and in 1999 for the military. So that's because we now know that human beings make mistakes. There's errors. And because death is irreversible, it's not a legal alternative for the government to kill its citizens. And number three, there's the logical fallacy of improper or perfect implementation. So everybody that I talk to, they fantasize about a painless, wonderful kind of way of administering death where it's only the most seriously ill and horrific pain that are killed, and that everyone's happy about it. But of course, human being, what they are, that isn't what happens at all. And I would point out that the organs, the reason why the Canadian government wants to expand euthanasia to children, babies, and people who are just depressed or have eating disorders, is because they want to harvest their organs. And I can tell you that there's already been a case of a person being euthanized and their heart being sent over the border to an American, a rich American, who jumped the queue and got the heart of a euthanized person. This is big business. So those are your arguments. Number one is you cannot give informed consent. Number two, death has been abolished because it's irreversible. And number three, the fallacy of proper implementation. So those are the arguments that AI has come up with for me. And they've pointed out to me, I think it was ChatGPT that has pointed out to me at length. They said that the Carter decision is very limited. So I'll briefly tell you the facts. So what happened was there was a woman who suffered from, a middle-aged woman who suffered from spinal stenosis, which is a fusion of the spine that's uncomfortable. And she wanted to die, but she couldn't die. And she couldn't commit suicide. She might not be able to commit suicide, be physically capable of doing it by the time she was ill enough to be killed. And so the Supreme Court of Canada, a group called a ghoulish death cult, called Death with Dignity, which is so revolting, as if the only death you can have with dignity is a lethal injection to be put down like a dog, as if all the heroic soldiers that gave their lives for Canada did not die with dignity, or all the people who struggled on as best they could did not die with dignity. It's absolute bullshit. But anyways, this woman was already dead. The case was moot when it got to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the Supreme Court of Canada, which is 9 unelected civil servants appointed by the government, they are not elected at all, decided, so they reversed their earlier decision, which they cannot do. They had considered euthanasia about 20 years ago in a case called Rodriguez, and they said it was not in the public interest, and they did not allow the murder provisions of the criminal code to be amended to allow a doctor to kill. In that case, it was a woman with multiple sclerosis. So they reversed an earlier decision in February of 2015. But the person that they were referring to, Kay Carter, was already dead. It was a moot case. And these 9 civil servants unanimously and anonymously, so most legal decisions are decided by a particular judge, and then the other judges comment on that decision. That didn't happen in the case, the most significant case in Canadian history that has allowed the government to execute extrajudicially by lethal injection 103,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadian citizens. And they did it anonymously and unanimously. And the Chief Justice at that time was a woman who I've met. I went to a conference, Women in the Law conference, with her when I was in law school. Her name is Beverly McLaughlin. And she was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that reversed itself to say that you have a constitutional right to be killed by your government. And what they said was it wasn't fair to Kay Carter, this woman who was already long dead. She'd gone to Switzerland, been euthanized by a doctor in Switzerland. They said it wasn't fair to her that she had to wait until she would to be terminally ill when she might not have the physical capability like someone else who committing suicide was at that time not illegal, and she might not, by the time she was terminally ill, she might not be able to commit suicide. So that was the decision. That was the parameter of the decision. And it did not say, and this is what ChatGPT pointed out to me repeatedly, is that it's very hard for me to read the decision because I'm only human, and it's basically line after line after line of the government saying we want to kill you, to me, because I am the target population of this evil government, this liberal Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau gang of criminals. But what ChatGPT repeatedly stressed to me from this decision, this court decision, which changed the law of murder from 811 years, so where persons could be murdered by the state with extrajudicially, without judge or jury, no legal oversight at all. And what ChatGPT stressed to me over and over again is there's nothing in the decision that says that a doctor must kill a person who asks to be killed. And yet the criminal code has been amended by the Parliament to allow for the doctors to have no repercussions whatsoever. Any old way that they want to do it, they can kill, and they cannot be held responsible for killing Canadian citizens. And so ChatGPT, and this is the point I want to stress with you today, said that there's nothing in the decision of Canada versus Kay Carter that says that a doctor has the right to or must kill. It's a completely different issue. So it may be not a criminal act for somebody to kill themselves, but there's nothing in that decision that says the government has to gear up its whole machinery, every machinery of the taxpayers' expense and the delivery of medical services to Canadians to accommodate people who say they want to die or to offer death to Canadians. There's nothing in there that says that. But now there's case after case after case of people saying, oh, well, I'm blind, so I want to be killed. I should be able to be killed. It's discrimination for me not to be killed. The Carter decision doesn't say that. It does not say anything about the government has to provide you with death. It just said that it wasn't fair to Kay Carter to be killed early or to commit suicide before she was terminally ill. So the whole system that's built up with this phony word, medical assistance in dying, never say that word, never. It's a euphemism. It's a propaganda euphemism come up with by Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney's evil government. So you can start by never say MAiD, never use that word, because it's not medical. And I firmly believe that if justice will prevail in Canada and that every doctor, I'm telling you now why it's unlawful. At the principle of the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II, every single doctor and German soldier said we were just following orders, and the principle or the ratio that came out of the Nuremberg trials, there is no defense to unlawful order, to unlawful act to say I was carrying out an order. And I'm telling you now, doctors and nurses, and especially you, Ellen Wiebe, Dr. Ellen Wiebe in Vancouver, who's killed 1,000 of my fellow Canadians. You're going to have your Nuremberg trial. You think, I know you like killing people. Stephen King said murder is like potato chips, you can't stop with just one. The most prolific serial killer in the history of the Commonwealth was a medical doctor in England named Dr. Harold Shipman. And he killed his vulnerable, old, and mostly female patients because he liked doing it. Dr. Ellen Wiebe, she said she loves it. You can see the Ted Bundy gleam in her eye. That's why we have had almost the entire judicial system we've created is to prevent deaths and murders, because there's a predilection to do that. And no society can last if the stronger members of a society kill the weaker members, because then the weaker members can't be around the stronger members anymore. And weaker members of society have something to offer too. So start by never saying MAiD. And I'm asking all the young men out there, the healthy, strong young men who, you wouldn't be facing this decision for another 50 or 60 years. It's not fair to me that my entire retirement has been ruined because I'm afraid to go to a doctor, because I'm afraid of being offered to be killed. How would you like it? You went to ask for medical help or for health care, and they offered to kill you. How would you like it? You wouldn't like it. And it's not fair that I have to face that every time I'm trying to take care of my health. I want to live. I like life. My father lived to be 101, 30 years older than I am now. Am I going to live for 30 years with the sword of Damocles hanging over my head in the form of medical assistance in dying? No. We're going to use every asset available in our democratic tools that have been handed to us by our forefathers to bring this evil practice of euthanasia in Canada to an end. That's it for now. I love you all. Take care.